Alright, it got a bit chilly here, and so I put on me Imam's hat, and this is me Sufi robe. And if you believe that, I got some swampland to sell you in Alabama. And over here we have what I was attempting to complete. It looks simple, but there are some strange symbols. So to complete the definition of the Archimedean, now that you've watched the previous video, because you're going to have to watch all of them, and this is the second. The Archimedean refers to this circle. It's one of the only two Archimedeans in the universe, and tune into the last video if that doesn't make sense, because that's an absolutely proved statement. I proved it in 2022. So this is an Archimedean of an object, but I'm not quite right. It's the Archimedean of a space. What's the difference between a space and an object? You know, you have to halt here. What is the superspace? The superspace is reality. I mean, you'd have to say that because this is a subspace of that. So whatever that is, which we call usually 3D, careful, but that is accurate enough, especially when you're looking at a plane. So what's the difference between a plane, an object, and a space? Well, a plane is either a space or an object or both. Which is it? It's not an object, but this is. This is an object in the plane, and the plane is a space. So the plane is a space. The plane is a space that needs an object, and there are only two in the space. And those are the Archimedeans of the space, and there are only two, and they have numeric values. If this is the center of a line, you don't see any lines here. So there is a point here, but it's not a Euclidean point. But if you were to say it were a Euclidean point, then you would have to draw two straight lines, because the two straight lines are what parameterize the plane. But you can also parameterize the plane with a single object instead of two objects, because each of those lines is a separate object in the space. Make sense? So are the lines objects? You could either say yes or no, and that's the beginning of my lesson in superposition, which I've been promising for at least 3 lectures, not continuous or contiguous. But I have been continually promising would be more accurate than continuously. Continuously means like this. Continually means any sort of regularly. It's more towards regularly. Continuously is a highly charged word in the scientific philosophy realm. And I'll be leading into Ruđer Josip Bošković's work on continuity, which is also here. This is an object in the plane, which is a space. It's also an Archimedean of the space with a value 1, making this a derivative Archimedean. So there are two Archimedeans in the plane. This one is an object because you can see it in the plane. And in fact, you can see it because that's how you see, and I covered that in the previous video. Now you see why it takes so long to lead up to this. Because now all I have to do is just go boom, boom, boom. It's in the prior video. You get how induction works? That's an extremely powerful concept that I just taught you. It's a structural approach rather than a sequential approach. And that leads us back into superposition, which I'm going to lead into. But I need to complete what I meant by Archimedean. There are two Archimedeans in the plane. It turns out that there are two Archimedeans in volume space, which would be the extension of this with depth. But if you say it's the third dimension, that would be linear, and that's incorrect because those are lines which don't have a surface. This does. So this is an object, an Archimedean in the plane, which is a space that's not 2D, but you have to compose it on two linear numbers. So these two numbers, one of which is the y number, and one of which is the x number in Euclidean space. And it is a space, isn't it? So now you know I'm using that word correctly. It does have several meanings. All right. So the space is the plane, which is infinite, which is a problem, which is why we can't call it an object. But there is an object in the plane. Now Euclidean began axiomatically by saying there is another object in the plane. Is that true? You could say yes or no. It's superpositional, because there are two right answers, but there are no wrong answers. But when you say that, it's not exactly binary anymore, and that's the nature of superpositional logic. It has another gate, and it's actually much deeper than that, and I'm the only person who's actually seen to the depth properly to explain what is superposition, both as a system of logic, a system of mathematics, and actually, I'll show you more about what superposition means, because as you know, Paul Adrien Maurice Dirac, my teacher, wrote a whole book on it. 98% of which is inscrutable mathematics, but the other 2%, right at the beginning, about 30 pages long as I recall, is required reading, because then he attempts his definition as superposition, which resulted in a new notation which is now universally accepted. So this was no mean feat. He also discovered the positron, the linear opposite of the electron. But there's another opposite of the electron that's not the linear opposite of the electron. And you may try to guess what that is. Not the positron, which is actually a charge opposite particle. There is another particle which is not just charge opposite, and not strictly speaking charge opposite, as I'm going to show you for Ruđer Josip Bošković, a Croatian Jesuit priest from about 250 years ago, whose book you can get for free. I've given several lectures on that, but we're going to get into that, because that gets into quantum superposition, which unlocks the universe using this geometry, which begins with a new Archimedean that's the non-Euclidean Archimedean of planar space. These two numbers refer to the Archimedean, literally refer to it. This is actually meant to be a complete circle inside the Archimedean. The Archimedean has a numeric value, but you know it has to have two, because it has to have an x linear number and a y linear number. And that has been proved, but I proved it again in a new way, which is actually quite significant, although it's not a discovery because it was already known. But the new proof is actually quite geometric and therefore profound, as is my whole premise for existence as a mathematician, geometer, physicist, scientist, or astronomer, or anything else, or a human being, as I covered in the last lecture. And now you know why I get out there sometimes, okay? That's who you're dealing with. I take this seriously. And I gave several examples in the last video on how those around me don't seem to take it as seriously as I do. You do have to do it correctly. This is the Archimedean of the plane, with a numeric value that composes x and y into a new number system called binary. And we covered that in the lecture before last. See how I've been building up to this? This is a madness with a method. That's called science, by the way. You have to go out into the cloud. I did. I came back with the tablets. Okay? I also claimed to be a prophet and an imam in the last video. I hope you're understanding why science needs a leader now. You have to start at the beginning if you want to be a leader. That's a law of the universe. Nobody escapes that. That's called science too. This is a surface value of 1 proportion 2, so it's smaller than 1, which is why it's inside 1. This number is 2 proportion 1, which is invert, technically reciprocal, y. They multiply to 1. And that's why binary numbers have to have a 1 in them. Otherwise, there's no value that can change. But when the number changes, you see it's a conjugal number. The number 2 occurs in 2 locations where it has different relative value. That's relativity at what you'll come to see as the quantum level, because you're looking actually at the quantum. What's inside that surface? You know what's outside the surface? Space. We just said so, remember? There's a method to my intuitive madness I learned from Fritz Zwicky, the greatest inductionist of all time, and he has several patents to prove it. So he was no slouch, and he invented dark matter, dunkle Materie. I read his papers. I read his book. I know Fritz very well, the greatest astrophysicist of all time. We'll come back to dunkle Materie, because I told you I have all the answers, and it begins here. And donc la matière exists, but it's less than 3% of the actual force value. And gravity has definitely been defied. That's why donc la matière was invented, because of anti-gravity, which I discovered. Ding 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 ding, yeah. Da 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 da. Our 5-year mission, coming up on 5 years actually, not a 5-year plan. Alright, so let's get to the point. Pardon the pun. We did mention the point, and I had promised a few videos ago that I was going to tell you how the point has to be redefined. Well, now you see why. There are no points here. Because Euclid began axiomatically with a point in order to get his line, which is made of points, correct? That's in Elements, so yes, the most popular book ever printed, far surpassing the Bible. Far surpassing the Bible in impact. Because it affects our rational logical system, the Holy Bible doesn't. And since I'm one of the foremost experts on the Holy Bible, since I studied it for 40 years and wrote 4 books on it, I suppose I'm entitled to my opinion, whatever you think. Do watch the previous videos where I give you my credentials, which may make you pee in your pants, okay? You're not messing around with me. And as for the man who helped me get in touch with Kirchheim-Munkel, I was a little harsh. But it's because I have no faith in Kirchheim-Munkel anymore, because I have no faith in anybody. Here's why. This is the Archimedean of the plane that replaces the Euclidean point, because the point has no surface, and neither does a line, and neither does 2D space. It has squares. That's why c squared is such an interesting number. Squared, that actually is a geometry, as you now know, based on this rather imaginary grid, which if you extend it by looking down the barrel, you can't even see the third dimension, but that is how you see. You'll never see that third dimension until something moves. That is so profound, Bernardo Kastrup had better sit at my feet and polish my boots. And he will pay me to listen to me, because Bernardo has made a little bit too much money with his philosophy. He's a very accreditable scientist, and I respect him. But now everybody is being called to account by the Imam, because I will take him to pieces if he doesn't listen to me, because I need him. So talk to Bernardo. He needs to interview me, doesn't he? So does Tim Maudlin. Okay? Even though they're mortal enemies and would scratch each other's eyes out if they were in the same room. They did so on the Kirchheim-Munkel shows. Notice how these 3 names come together? You see what I'm all about? This replaces the Euclidean point as the Archimedean of the plane, and I proved in 2022 that 1 proportion 1 is the exact rate of that new line, and that is a new line. This is a line. All lines are closed in the universe. There are no straight lines. And so Euclid's parallel postulate baffled the Dark Age mathematicians for over a millennium. They wrestled 2 millennia. More. They wrestled with a parallel postulate, which is not even part of his axiomatic sequence. It comes at the end of his fucking book. And they argued about that. But they never argued about a non-existent point, which I've given so many lectures on that I just will not elaborate on that. So this is a point in physical space, as I'll be showing you. Not yet, but that's what it's going to be. I'm wearing the hat, am I not? You need no stinking hat to teach you mathematics. So this is actually called the multiplicative identity. Is it? Not quite. This is a surface which is a 2-component number, obviously, and any number outside of it will be greater than 1 and will represent another circle. So this reparameterizes the plane away from the linear dimension by which you need two at orthogonal angle, to a single surface that composes the two numbers as a 1 proportion 1 rate that has direct bearing on the definition of the calculus. My teacher, Boschkovich, inherited the robe of Newton, and I've given a couple of lectures on Leibniz, who really had something on the ball in the religious direction, having to do with the I Ching and binary numbers. I hope you watch that. I don't expect you will. I wouldn't. Shouldn't I tell you what's in it? No time. This'll take 12 hours as it is, because I'm going to teach you the collapse of the wave function and the unified field solution, which is Kirchheim-Mungel's precious theory of everything. And by the way, one of my teachers, whose book I wore out and broke the spine several times, Sir Roger Penrose, still kicking at 93. He'll be 94, I believe, in spring. And that man is as lucid as ever, and he's on the Kirchheim-Mungel show. I would love to talk with Sir Roger. And Kurt, you can get me in touch with Sir Roger. So if I sound bitter that someone just reached out to me within the past 2 days to try to answer my plea to get me in touch with an interviewer, he tried. I came close to making fun of him in the last lecture, but out of pure bitterness, nothing against my benefactor, thank you, I will give you money. You just earned yourself some money. Any money I make, you're going to get some of it, if you want it. A lot of us are sensitive about our identities out on the open military-controlled internet. It's a military operation. I'm sure you're at least conspiratorially aware of that possibility. That could be, since everything you do is monitored. And I was in the industry on the inside, I know. All right. So 1 proportion 1 is the same thing as a fraction, which is a binary number because the denominator is a power of 2, and it meets my constraint to make actually a circular binary system, whereby not only does the denominator have to be a power of 2, but the other number in the two components has to be 1. And that makes a unified rational system with no division by 0 and no irrational numbers. And I'll show you that in a moment. I think you may expect that you might like that. Using nothing but rational numbers and you'll never need calculus again. Complex numbers are absorbed and actually make sense now. Just a rational system that doesn't even use add. Isn't that better? You're going to come to find out it's what the universe says is right. Not only better, it's the only way to get the quantum of gravity and the collapse of the wave function. And those two problems, by the way, are related. And that's the secret, is finding the relationship that can be proved mathematically through geometry. This is non-Euclidean geometry, the very first. Lobachevsky did not discover non-Euclidean geometry. That's a misnomer. It's simply 4D geometry that just happens to involve the parallel postulate, whereby it's defied, finally solving the problem that the Dark Age muckraking, stupid-ass, brilliantly gifted mathematicians were trying to figure out. They never did. There were dozens of attempted solutions at the parallel postulate problem. It raises a paradox. Turns out it's the same as a quantum paradox, but it's so removed from the actual problem, which is, this is the solution to the problem. You need a surface in space. Because everything is a surface. That's the definition of matter. It's not exactly the definition of mass, though, and we're going to get to that when we get to the quantum of gravity, which is a very interesting phenomenon. It's monopolar. So it defies Emmy Noether's symmetry, for which she got a Nobel Prize, I believe it was 1902. Only the second woman to get a Nobel Prize, so interview me, Kurt. Interview me, anybody. I don't care who. Lex. I know this is really... this is like marching into the Pentagon and just saying, I'm here to talk with the general. And like, who are you? But that's what I am forced to do, because that's the vow that a scientist takes. If you make a significant discovery, you have to try to share it. It's like the gospel. It's the rational, logical version of the gospel. If you have it, you have to share it, because it's to be shared. It's good, Well, that's really a prime requisite. It has to be good. Is calculus good? Is space-time good? It has its applications. I'll show you a much better system, though, if you're after the secrets of the universe, which I don't know if you know the byline of my channel. It's the secrets of the universe. Hello. So this is it. It begins here. You have to have a surface in space because that matches what we discovered in the 20th century at all scales. Everything is spherical. Well, so's this geometry. This translates directly from circle to sphere on a constant. So you don't do better than that, but it also solves Dirac's half-spin issue, doesn't it? Because if a sphere is parameterized on two circles, which I can prove it is, what's the third? Because there are three. Isn't that interesting that you have basically 3D space composed on three circles on a sphere? That's much better than three lines, is to compose a sphere on three circles. But you only need two, and that's binary, and that's better, and that leads to the solution to the space-time conundrum, which I don't know if you know what it is. It's the zero at the frame reference. Point is a zero, because you have to have a point. In this system, there is no point. This is the surrogate point. You have to change the word, but that's what it is. So that's why I invented the word Archimedean, because the commonality between the linear point, which parameterizes the plane, because you can draw two lines through it, that's why you need a point. That's why you can't get rid of zero. There's a division by zero error that the universe says that we're violating just without caring. We composed our entire computer system around it. You know how? It's a split zero. There's a plus and a minus zero on all binary machines, which are all computers. They have a split zero. There's a plus zero and a minus zero. And that's part of the reason behind why when you divide by zero, your CPU will halt. And that was discussed by such men as John von Neumann, one of the legends of the 20th century in both logic, and he met Jung. I don't know if you know how Jung fits into all this. Jung really got around. And he's into synchronicity, which has to do with time, which I will give you some secrets of the universe on synchronicity and time. Because it's built into the surface of your consciousness, which is a surface. I proved it. Because reality has a surface. How do you see the surface of reality? You have a surface-shaped consciousness, so it's spherical. It's not a point. You don't have point consciousness, although you can see whenever you have a circle or a sphere, you have a point. But it's not a linear point, because a linear point is 1 0, but a binary point is 2 zeros, because it's 0 over 0, because this is 1 over 1. That's called the proportional number system, and I proved that that's the binary fractions when defined, restricting from multiples of prime units. The prime numbers in binary space are the numbers. They're all prime. In a new definition of primacy, because prime numbers are simply a predictable result of irrational linearity. And J H Conway, another one of my teachers who died of the COVID virus in 2020, I cried. That was a tremendous loss. His surreal number tree proves that this is a natural result of building out of a double zero, which is a binary beginning. So the surreal numbers are based on binarity. And on day 1, you get the linear numbers, +1 and -1. On day 2, on the positive side, you get this. The split from 1, which would be +1 on day 1. On day 0, you have 0, 0 with no relation. And that's genius. That defines a linear number for the first time in history. Much more important than solving the parallel postulate paradox, which actually only I finally did. I solved it with what I just told you. It's a derivative of a real problem, which is the quantum paradox. The difference between a point and a wave. This is a very simple wave, just to lead you into. We're going to be talking about light speed in a second, because this is unitized light speed. Its distance over time is a perfect rate, which is 1 proportion 1. I write it 1:1 because that's the logical way to write it, but it's exactly the same thing as mathematical 1 over 1. And that's very important to realize, because that unifies the logic system with the number system. And in the two-component number system, conjugality raises a very interesting issue called superposition, which, as I just stated at the beginning of this video sequence, is... But you see, I've gone too far afield. What I want to complete for you is the foundation from which we're going to proceed into everything I just tantalized you with. We will get the collapse of the wave function. It falls out naturally on the quantum jump in physical space. There's a quantum jump in physical space. Einstein discovered it. He got a Nobel Prize for discovering that. He capitalized on Max Planck's quantum. And that actually defines light speed as 1 over 2, 2 over 1. Because that implies motion. Because you can't get from the surface of 1 proportion 1 to the inside and the outside simultaneously on a consistent Noether balance unless this is proportional. But it involves motion. And that's a dimension. So the dimensionality of this circle is twofold. There is one two-componency on the surface, and that's the center of the system. So what is inside is conjugal with the outside on the 1-2-2-1 relationship, which you can see split space. The inside we're calling anti-space, and you'll see why when we get to the spatial interpretation of this. For now it's just numeric, to show you that in two reciprocal numbers, both of which are powers of 2, but one of which is always 1, which is the 0th power of 2. And that incorporates 0 into the system the correct way. 0 does have a role. In order to converge on the center, which is 1 in this system, the multiplicative identity system has a center number of 1, the Archimedean. It's the mathematical value, the numeric value of the Archimedean of the space. In Euclid's system, the numeric value of the Archimedean of the planar space is 0. And you must begin with 0, 0, because the plane has two numbers. And you can see both numbers are conjugal. And so they're reciprocal. That's the mathematical term for perpendicular. And I will prove that to you when we get to Boschkovich force curve diagram and the strong force, which I will finally deconvolve, so you'll understand the relationship between the two primary forces at the center of the universe. From that we'll derive the exact definition of space with relation to time, and you'll see there's a conversion in the middle that all of your mathematical physicists missed. In order to convert, you have to see the transform, and it's a two-step transform, and that has just baffled every single mind except mine. But I just learned something because this is still unfolding in my own mind. It's so profound, it's just wild. It leads to every solution, almost instantly, with diligence and doing things right. That's why I began this video series in the previous video, by doing things right. So now we have the true Archimedean of what we actually see, which is the basis of consciousness. That's what our visual system, which even blind people have, does. It enables you to conjugate with the universe. That's called consciousness. But you see, the conjugal is reality. They both have surfaces, and they both have to be synchronized, both in space and in time. We don't experience energy directly, but energy contains time. This surface number is composed of frequency-wavelength relationship on another conjugation, because this is a two-dimensional surface, so it needs two linear numbers. That's what that means. It doesn't mean they have to be conjugated on the Pythagorean theorem, which is the right-angle law for linear space. So you can get anything inside the space, but you'll need the right-angle law. Even space-time is x squared plus y squared plus z squared plus w squared, which is time signed negatively, but when you square it, it's positive, but it is invert, so you have a 3-1 signature for the four-component space-time system. That makes pseudo-hyperbolic geometry. This makes spherical geometry, which is much more accurate. In fact, you don't need calculus, and you don't need to use irrational numbers, either by the Pythagorean theorem or by the calculus, or by anything else you actually do. This uses rational numbers, much to be preferred, as you'll come to see, because it's geometrically identical with a physical system. The universe taught me that. It's not mine, it's the universe's. I'm simply sharing it with consensual science. Wouldn't you like to consider what I just said? Interview me. It's time. So to complete this, the Archimedean is now transferred from Euclidean 2D space to this Archimedean, which is a two-componency system that correctly parameterized the space on a circle whose center can be proved to be zero. But now you know that it's actually the 0th power. So it's a power number at the center. It is a 0 on the exponential line, which, as you know, is written as superscripts. So when you have 2 to the first power, you have 2 over 1. When you have 2 to the second power, that's 2 superscript 2. Am I saying that right? No. It's 2, isn't it minus 1? I believe it's minus 1. What if it's 2 to the 1/2 power? That's the square root of 2. So we don't use that. We use linear numbers, including 0, as the power numbers, so that the center number of the power line is 0. So 2 to the 0th is 1, correct? So, what's at the center? If the lowest number is 2 to the 0th, what about 2 to the -1? What's that? That's 1/2. That's inside the circle. So the two-componency number can be reduced to a linear number, and that's called a representable number. It's also called a computable number, and that's why our computers use binary. And the only difference between this geometry, binary, and the Wikipedia definition of binary is that in the Wikipedia definition of binary, the numerator in the first, if these are the two components, the numerator in the first component does not have to be 1, but the denominator always has to be a power of 2. That means that you can have 3 over 2, 5 over 2, 7 over 2, 9 over 2. Those are considered binary numbers. But you see, in this system, that's not allowed, because the reciprocal would be 9 over 2. And that doesn't reduce always to a linear number. And you can prove that. It'll be your homework. So the true definition of the geometric binary numbers is that both numbers have to be powers of 2, but even that wouldn't do it, because you can have 4 over 2. That's not allowed. So one of the component numbers has to be 1, and that's called the one on the diagonal, because that's how we see it. It's called matrix visualization. You don't need to draw a matrix, you're looking at it. So it's 1, 2, 2, 1. And you use conjugal multiplication, which is how you multiply two fractions. So that when you multiply 1 over 2 times 2 over 1, it equals 1. That's also true with 3 over 8 and 8 over 3. So what's the problem with that? Probably none. But I don't allow it because this is simplest. But if you do allow that, what you have are multiples of this. So that instead of just 1 over 2, you have multiples of the numerator. In strict physical geometry, you can't do that, and I proved that. You have to use my system, and it's the first ultra-restrictive definition of what is a binary number, because now the true definition that supersedes Wikipedia's primitive definition, much closer to physical reality because mine is exact and Wikipedia's is not, you have to have 1 on one of the diagonals, which is a power of 2, but it's the lowest power of 2. That's very important, that 1 is the lowest power of 2, because 2 to the 0th is 1. So 2 to the first is 2 over 1. That's here. But at the same time, and now I can introduce the word time as a teaser, because you know that this motion going away from the surface is in 2 directions. That's motion. That's the motion dimension of circular space. What's on the circle? Light speed. Light speed is on the circle. Because the lowest frequency in the universe is 2 over 1, making the highest wavelength 1 over 2. And Max Planck proved that. And nobody noticed that that's what he proved. So I just took you back to the year 1900, when quantum mechanics was discovered. This is the basis of the discovery of quantum mechanics, is that this relationship between these two numbers is also proportional to two numbers on the surface, which parameterizes 1 as 2 ones, as a pair of ones, as a conjugal pair of ones that multiply to 1. 1 proportion 1 times 1 proportion 1 equals reducible 1 proportion 1 proportion 1. 4 ones, all proportional. You can reduce that to 1 proportion 1, which then reduces to a computable number. 1 is the lowest computable number. 0 is only computable with add, because if you try to multiply by 0, you run into its reciprocal, which is a division by 0 CPU halt. That's in the IEEE. The IEEE, you could look it up. What causes the division by 0 error? I just showed you in true mathematical physics, true physical mathematics. We're coming up on 40 minutes, so I'm going to try to wrap up this whole diagram so you know what this funny symbol is. I just told you, but now you can see it. They're two perpendicular lines. One of them is the Archimedean surface, which is redundant. The Archimedean is the surface. The Archimedean of Euclidean space is nullity, which causes an error in multiplicative space. You think about all these things I'm saying and replay this if you need to or want to. It'll do you good. The perpendicular line to the surface, but only absolutely perpendicular at the surface, that can be proved, leading to the quantum paradox again. But this number is a curved number. This number looks straight. It's not straight. You have to dial this, and there's a term for this. You have to dial this perpendicular to the surface line, which comes out from the center. You dial it until you get the integral of force, and that's centrifugal force coming from the center of the system. It applies a pressure to the surface called centrifugal force. Can you just guess what that might be in physical space? Try the opposite. The opposite force contracts, and to the proportion that this force pushed out from the center to create one force at the surface, the opposite force goes the other way toward the center. Those are the numbers going in. They converge on the center because each one is a circle. So the pressure is not a linear line, it's a circular integral line, isn't it? That's called the pressure. It's a number. Okay? It's a number on this line. So this has a two-component number. It's 1 proportion 1. Do you know what those values are? They're in two different domains. One is the time domain, and the other one is the space domain. And that's called frequency, which is in the time domain, to the proportion that the wavelength is in the space domain. You can actually invert that and get the same result. And that's the paradox, although you could simplify it. I will show you how to do that. But that is light speed. Its distance over time is 1 proportion 1 when it's unitized, which physical mathematicians do all the time, is make the value of the speed of light 1 proportion 1, because the units are arbitrary. The second has never been defined. You know how it's officially defined? That changed in the 1960s, by the way. But the second is a most elusive concept. And if you examine both the atomic clock, the cesium clock, there are various ways of getting the definition of a second on a very precise measurement inside an atom, which is used in what is called the atomic clock. That's on a cycle. That's motion. But the second, the way it was interpreted before the 1960s, was an exact numeric derivation of the circle of the Earth around the Sun, called a solar year. From the Earth perspective, it makes a circle, which has closure, so it's a rate. And from that you can derive a second on that circle. That is what one of these numbers is. It's the rate in a time. It's time-space. It's a time-space number. But you see what I proved, when you get to spherical space on the conjugation of 2 of these circles, and you only need 2, and that turns out to be mightily profound, as you'll see, because it describes geometrically half-spin, which Dirac discovered. Much more important than his discovery of the positron, which the particle physicist went to town with, never saying that it was the linear opposite. The spherical opposite of the electron is the proton, because the proton is at the center of this circle, and it has this radius. It's 1 femtometer. But you see, we want this to be 1 femtometer. So it's 1 femtometer proportion something else. That's actually on the circle, as well as the rate, which is essentially frequency, but it's conjugate with wavelength. Well, that really leads us right to the wave-particle duality, because doesn't the proton make a point in space? The proton does. Does the electron? No. How do we know that? Because it occupies this circle at the boundary between the 2 Boschkovich forces that conjugate and explain the force balance system of the universe, which have 2 infinities in them, which I discovered from Boschkovich's work, Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis. That's 42 minutes. Thank you for your patience. I hope I have imparted to you some tantalizing or intriguing, or perhaps even valuable to you thus far, information. This is just the beginning of about a 20-hour lecture series where I will be divulging all the answers that all the physicists and mathematicians are seeking, all of them. Unless it's some linear mathematical problem such as the 7 Clay prizes, one of which was cracked. And I misidentified that because I thought it was the Poincaré conjecture, but that actually isn't one of the problems, but it's involved in this solution. Because I studied the guy who actually cracked one of these 7 so-called millennial prizes put out by the Clay Institute, really a reduction of Riemann's 20 most important mathematical problems for the 20th century. They distilled it down to 7. I don't know if they brought any new ones that Riemann never thought of, but I don't know that precisely, because they're linear problems. Well, you're going to need calculus, complex numbers. You're going to have to use complex numbers with calculus. That's how all physics is done now. That sound inviting? Something went wrong. This went wrong. Nobody ever stopped to realize you can parameterize the plane to match physics. That's what I did. So, get me an interview. I've done everything I am willing to do because I don't stand to gain anything. I'll never ask for money. I do this because I took the vow of science. I take it seriously. I'm going to make sure it shows. So this gets some attention. It's not for me. I don't want your attention. I want you to observe what I discovered, because that's what a scientist does. It irritates me that these guys like Kastrup, Maudlin, and, they would scratch their eyes out. That's not a scientist, because that's not a gentleman. These men are unversed in culture. It shows on the Kirchheim-Mungel show. He was so sorely ashamed of that. I thought he'd pull it. To his credit, he did not. And that man has now risen to the very top. Kurchai Mungal is the only realistic scientific presenter on the planet. I think he's gifted from heaven. Would be an honor to be interviewed by him. It would help if Penrose were in the room. I'm running out of time. I have my own human desires, but it's totally overshadowed by the way of heaven, which I will pursue until I am in heaven, and I don't think anything is going to stop me from that. My Creator will have the last word. He already did. In my life, my Creator had the last word with me when I was 17. I haven't deviated. I know there's a record, there's a second column. It adds up. You got to pray for forgiveness then. Well, that's why I'm a Christian. Stay tuned. Thank you very much, and may Allah bless you forever, and all your houses and all your people forever and ever, however long that lasts. May His love always be with you, as it certainly is now. Wake up. Thank you.